as many of you know. One of the main reasons why this makes sense is Ed Spann, and was Ed Spann, given his history with the program and the department. A lot of you know and knew him, right, a lot better than I did, so I won't talk a long time because I know there's a few of his colleagues and former students who want to say some things. But I just wanted to say a few things about his career and really his connection to African and African American studies and when he started the Black Studies program. You know, Ed was a major figure, certainly, in the profession, and especially in his fields of 19th century U.S. and urban history for 50 years. You know, some of his many accomplishments are in the short biography that we put together here, and I want to thank Crystal, who wrote a chunk of that, and Marvin Susat, one of our former students, who did a biography project on former faculty members. Very interesting. So Marvin did a great job on that too. And you know, although we're here to talk about his role in the creation of Black Studies and teaching African American history, I think it's good to start by remembering that he was a scholar of national, international reputation, really. His first book, which I put on my copy on the table, so I'm going to make sure it's there when you guys are done. His first book, right, was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, and his second book won the New York State Historical Society Award, which is, for historians, that's a big deal. That's a big award. So, he was certainly a major figure. And again, I wanted to start with this a little bit because we're going to be talking mainly about his teaching and his role in that area. But he was a scholar of major significance. He taught a wide range of courses here, including the particularly rigorous senior seminar that history majors remembered long afterwards. Those are the ones who made it through, right? The senior seminar.
I still have nightmares, but it's all good.
It was a famously rigorous experience, yes. And the first course I taught here at ISU was Ed's course on Jackson to Lincoln, which was a course that he created too, and that was the very first course I ever taught when I came here. So, we're honoring him tonight, I think, for all that work, but particularly for, his role in teaching African American history. As most of you know, he was not trained in Black history, but in the summer of 1969, he went to Morgan State University for a special seminar and training in teaching Black history, which was, of course, a big deal in 1969. It was a new thing, right, in 1969, I should say. The description, as I was reading, there's a good article in the Statesman from 1969 on Ed's seminar and his experience and coming back to teach Black history. It sounds like a pretty amazing experience, to be honest. I mean, the speakers included people like Stanley Elkins, who wrote Slavery in 1959, and Richard Wade, who wrote Slavery in the Cities and a bunch of books about African American history. And Carter Woodson, right, among others, in a 5-day period. It sounds intense. And they quoted Ed a couple of times talking about how there was a great deal of interchange and informal discussion late at night, after hours. And I imagine that was some of the highlight of the whole experience. And I like this quote. Ed said, "All members freely and openly expressed their thoughts, regardless of their race," unquote. And I think it's good to remember how amazing, that must have seemed in a lot of ways in 1969 to be discussing teaching African American history with a group of scholars from around the country, and he had the chance to go do this. And I think it speaks well of Indiana State, to be honest, that they sent him there for a summer workshop, right, to do this. And that's part of why we have this amazing history here at ISU. And at the time, the history profession was really just emerging into what we would call sort of a modern history of race and race relations. And that's, mainly true for white historians who had not addressed slavery, segregation, and so forth from what we would call a modern, racially unbiased perspective. African American historians have been doing that for a long time, but in the late 60s, this was pretty new from our perspective and from our benefit of time. The article describes the course that Ed then created and some of the readings, which were intense. Let me tell you, he had the autobiographies of Malcolm X, Frederick Douglass, multiple slave narratives, He used August Meyer's classic From Plantation to Ghetto, and so forth. I mean, this was cutting edge, you know, seriously sophisticated stuff in 1969. And especially, you know, in a school in the rural Midwest, right? This would have been an amazing reading list for students to encounter in 1969. I'm tempted to make a sort of old man sounding comment here about, boy, if I could assign those things now. You know, I never got to read those things. But it's sort of true, but anyway, I don't want to sound, you know, get off my lawn. Sort of statement, right? So, you know, all this happened too at a really critical time in the university's history, as you all know, with student activism certainly on the rise, and a growing number of African American students asking for recognition as much as anything else. One of the demands, as you know, was a Black Studies program and courses that expose students, and you know, importantly, all ISU students, to the importance of African American history and culture. And this was really the first, you know, serious movement to acknowledge the central place of Black students at ISU and the importance of African American history as part of U.S. history and culture. Right, a tremendous amount of change at this point, and again, for ISU to be one of the very first institutions to do all of this, it's, you know, is an amazing part of the history of our curriculum as much as anything. And so it started, a lot of it, right, with history and sociology and the social sciences, which had just recently broken up into separate departments. And a lot of the folks, some of the folks who are here now, right, Bill was here, and Dick Loki was here, and so on, right?
Yeah, I think he was here too.
Yes, you were, yes. Sorry.
I took it when I was
And John Newton was here when they built
John
the
was here
place. He
as a
was here in
student, right?
1870.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. So, and I promised I was going to shut up, and I will. You know, I know a couple of former students wanted to say a few things, but I did want to say something about, you know, my very short personal relationship with Ed was, and you have to indulge me for just a minute, was meaningful because I came to ISU in 1999 as Ed's, you know, successor, not replacement, but as his successor. And when I started researching ISU in preparation for my interview, I saw Ed's name on the list of faculty, right? This was in the AHA guide, but this was before websites. I couldn't Google him. You know, and I was both alternately impressed and terrified by the prospect, since it was pretty obvious that he must be retiring, or they wouldn't be hiring another mid-19th century U.S. historian. And he was, you know, a huge figure in the field, in my field. And I had read several of his books when I was in grad school. My own mentor, in fact, who was something of a giant in the field and a pretty notorious critic of everyone else who wasn't him, had previously recommended several of Ed's books to me, and he you know, recommended them as must-reads and exceptional, those were things he didn't say about other people very often. Let me tell you, that was high praise. So then I came to campus for my interview, and even more terrifying is that he was in the room for my presentation on scholarship. And I was talking about my dissertation that I just was finishing revisions and was about to get published, and I was so excited about it. So I was describing this, and I made a quick reference to some of the analysis, which was roll-off. It's a political science-y sort of term about elections. And I figured that no one would notice. But the first question, of course, Ed asked me was about roll-off, this sort of throw-in comment. And it was a perfect question. It was right on the mark for what my book was about. And when I gave him the answer, he actually nodded and he said, "Oh, that is significant." And I felt completely relaxed. It made my interview. I mean, seriously, and it was really cool. And then I finally arrived, and he was actually finishing clearing out his office up on the third floor. This is the one where Bill is, actually. It's in the middle office. Yeah, it was the third one there. And about a month after I got here, he invited me in to the office, and he sort of swept his hands out, and he said, "Well, take whatever else is left that you want." And there were about 1,000 books or so still in there. He'd already cleaned out a lot, right? But there were a lot still there. You know, and he knew it was my field, and I think he knew that I would really appreciate them. And I I think I carried off about 200. About once a month when I'm looking something up, I still open one and it says Edward K. Spann with the stamp that he had made. You know, it was a a real kindness, you know, that I always appreciated, and I suppose more than you know, the kindness was that he just, you know, I wasn't close to a colleague or an equal, but he treated me like that, and it was just very gracious of him, you know, to do that, and it was much appreciated. So he was certainly wonderful to me for a few months, and I've always appreciated that. Yeah, it was great. I'm going to let Dan in a second. I know a couple other folks asked me if they wanted to say something. Crystal, do you want to say something?
I think John was saying.
John wants to go first.
If we're doing chronological order.
You're doing chronological order? Okay.
Chris,
That's okay. I'm
I
done.
was trying to get you in but before he finished, Dan. That was really good, Chris.
Praise from Crystal is always
Dr. Spann would have been pleased.
well, thank you.
Yes, he would
And
be.
I thank you. And just before we do move on to have something to eat and sit down, and before Jonathan says a few words, just about what we do, we do have a plaque with our distinguished faculty, and we've added to it. And then we have Ed's picture up to go with Dr. Lyda and Conyers. And then we have a plaque over our offices to denote our distinguished emeriti. So, this is wonderful. John, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well,
Distracted.
thank you, Chris. Mrs. Spann, nice to see you tonight. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
I'm sorry.
I'm pleased to see you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, that I'm still alive.
We're all pleased with that. Thank you. You're welcome. Ed Spann was
No,
a
I'm fine,
professor
thank
of
you.
mine. I had 2 classes. Also with Dr. Giffen, I had a class with him in Indiana history, and with Dick Clokey in the Westward Movement. Some kind of movement, at least. I think it was West, as I recall. Ed Spann was a good teacher. I remember explicitly the 2 classes I was in. One was the history of the American city, and the other was history of the South. Both classes were in the basement of Homestead Hall. I can still see the way the classroom laid out. This picture here is exact. He almost always wore a turtleneck sweater. Always. He would make his presentations. He may have had notes. We never saw them. He would stand in front of the class, and he didn't pace, but he would kind of move about a little bit, make eye contact, sometimes look over, sometimes look at you. But everything was, it wasn't rehearsed, it was known. He spoke from knowledge. And I got something from it. I was a history major. I got a lot of red ink. Oh my God, I got red ink. I remember the one class in the history of the South, I wrote on the Trench Affair in the Civil War. And he questioned my references from the Daily Picayune of New Orleans explicitly, okay? But I still got a good grade, but there's a lot of red ink. But I remember as a good person, a good teacher, and one thing that, as you look back on it, he came to Terre Haute in 1961 and stayed. He didn't look to move. They came, I think you folks were from New York probably, from the East Coast, and came to Terre Haute and made their life here, became part of us, part of this university, part of the alumni, part of what made Indiana State special. And Ed Spann was part of that. He contributed his academic life, his professional life, to this university. As an individual, I'm grateful. I'm sure that many other students would say the same thing. He was a good teacher. Other people in this room were good teachers also, but he's the one we're talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you.